A sharp breeze drifted through the London streets as dawn began its slow ascent over the horizon. Shadows stretched across the pavement, and a delicate hush fell over the world, disturbed only by the early morning rustle of newspapers and the low hum of sporadic traffic. It was a moment of peculiar calm, the city not yet fully awake, but already teetering on the threshold of a new day. In an unassuming corner by a narrow alley, a figure shifted against a crumbling brick wall, his face partially obscured by a scruffy hood and his posture weighed down by invisible burdens. Passers-by would have assumed he was just another homeless man trying to keep warm, but if they looked more closely, they might have noticed the regal posture beneath the layers of mismatched clothing. This was Prince William, second in line to the British throne, disguised in a worn coat and tattered shoes, furtively adjusting the brim of an old cap to conceal his unmistakable profile. A single black backpack, looking as though it had seen better days, held a small water bottle and a few personal items. The choice to venture into these streets in disguise, especially this early in the morning, was an unprecedented gamble, an adventure driven by compassion, curiosity, and no small amount of nerve. Before we start, please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more updates. He had risen before sunrise in a discreet location miles away, slipping into a clothing ensemble prepared by his security detail. Though they initially expressed concern about the plan, he insisted, determined to see for himself the experiences faced by thousands of individuals living without homes. So many people in the United Kingdom, and indeed around the world, endured unimaginable hardships daily, and he wished to understand their plight beyond the confines of distant charity events or news segments. He wanted to engage with them at street level, to hear their stories, and to test whether a cafe known for championing charitable causes truly lived up to its reputation. There had been talk about a modest little establishment not far from the palace, one that purportedly offered free meals and warm welcomes to homeless individuals. Whispers of this cafe's generosity had reached his ears, but he was uncertain whether the rumored kindness was genuine or merely a well-packaged publicity stunt. Fueled by equal parts skepticism and hope, he embarked on his quiet mission. His disguise was meticulous yet purposefully subtle. He wore torn jeans that were a size too big and a sweater covered by a second-hand parka. Streaks of mud had been rubbed into the fabric to give it that worn-down, time-weathered feel. The actual transformation was more psychological than physical, however. He found it alarmingly easy to blend in when people refused to make eye contact with him. Homeless individuals often became invisible to society, and in this uncharted territory, he discovered the same phenomenon. Onlookers glanced his way, but their gazes quickly slid off him as if he were part of the scenery. A flash of empathy or discomfort would appear in their eyes, then vanish as they hurried along to catch a train or pick up groceries. Though not yet used to the feeling, he steeled himself, reaffirming the urgency of his mission. Time passed slowly that morning. He lingered around corners, occasionally meandering between parked cars, observing how others went about their day. With each passing minute, the city's pulse quickened, and the sound of car engines layered with the chatter of pedestrians. The haunting aroma of roasted coffee beans and warm pastries drifted from nearby shops, heightening his hunger and reminding him of his purpose. He tracked the cafe's location using a tattered city map he had folded and slipped into his back pocket. According to the instructions he had received through the palace's hush-hush channels, the cafe was just 3 blocks away, tucked on a quaint street lined with brick buildings. Eventually, he found himself across the road from a modest storefront with large windows and a sign reading, Martha's Heart Cafe. The sign itself was hand-painted, the letters swirling in a cheerful font over a pale green background. He paused for a moment, feeling the first pangs of nervousness flutter in his stomach. What if they recognized him? The risk felt incredibly real, but he reminded himself that people rarely look closely at those who appear homeless. He took a breath, slumped his shoulders slightly, and shuffled across the street. A small bell tinkled as he opened the door. Warmth and the scent of freshly baked bread enveloped him, a stark contrast to the chill of the street. He saw mismatched wooden tables and chairs arranged in a welcoming, if a bit haphazard, manner. Simple floral centerpieces decorated each table, and on the walls hung paintings from local artists, all for sale to support various charitable programs. A chalkboard menu behind the counter offered items like hearty soup, sandwiches, fair trade coffee, and a daily special of shepherd's pie. Within seconds, the person behind the counter, a young woman with curly hair and an earnest smile, looked up. Her bright eyes seemed to rest on him a moment longer than they might rest on any other patron, but there was no immediate sign of recognition. Instead, she offered a warm greeting. "Welcome to Martha's Heart. Come on in and make yourself comfortable." She motioned toward an empty table near the window. He nodded and smiled shyly, aware that his makeup, a bit of smudged dirt along his jaw, would hopefully hide any distinct features. He couldn't muster more than a murmur of thanks at first. Her kindness was both reassuring and deeply humbling, but he also felt a strange pang. He had never really experienced what it was like to be so entirely overlooked or treated with gentle pity. He settled at the table, resting his worn backpack by his feet. The café, though modest in size, thrummed with an inviting energy. A group of older women chatted over their knitting by the far wall. A middle-aged man wearing a construction uniform scrolled through his phone near the counter. A mother attempted to feed oatmeal to her giggling toddler. Soft music played in the background, the tune of a piano piece that was both soothing and melancholic. As he gazed around trying to imprint every detail, a nervous excitement coursed through him. He wanted to see how this cafe truly interacted with people in need, beyond the typical gestures of ordering and receiving a hot drink. The young woman behind the counter, whose name tag read Charlotte, approached with a gentle smile. "We have a special today. Shepherd's pie with a side salad, or we can get you a sandwich. Tea or coffee if you'd like?" Prince William, maintaining his demeanor, responded with a subdued voice. "I don't have much money." He felt his heart rate spike at the awkwardness of the admission. It was the sort of statement he'd never imagined saying in his life, but it rolled off his tongue with unexpected ease. Charlotte's eyes softened. "That's all right, love. If you can't pay today, we have a pay it forward board." She pointed toward a bulletin board near the entrance, plastered with small slips of paper. "People who come in with extra give a little donation, and anyone who can't afford a meal can use one of those credits. You're welcome to have a hot meal on us. No questions asked." He glanced over at the board, emotions swelling in his chest. Handwritten notes read things like, "1 free coffee, 1 free meal, and free slice of pie for someone in need." Those small pieces of paper embodied a generosity that resonated deeply. There was no condescension or humiliating process to receive help, just an open offer of kindness, facilitated by strangers who had come before. Humbled, he nodded and murmured a simple thank you. She left to fetch his meal. The generosity felt almost disconcerting, contrasting with his earlier fears that the cafe's policies might be more about marketing than genuine compassion. He overheard conversations around him. The older ladies with knitting needles discussed the local charity drive. The man in the construction uniform seemed restless, checking his phone frequently and sipping coffee. A waft of freshly baked bread drifted over from the kitchen, stirring his appetite. When Charlotte returned, she set down a steaming plate of shepherd's pie. The mashed potatoes on top had a golden brown crust, and the savory aroma of minced meat and gravy made his stomach rumble audibly. He realized how hungry he actually was. Though he had the resources to eat lavish meals whenever he wished, he had foregone breakfast on purpose to better immerse himself in the reality of those who go without meals. He took a cautious bite, and the warmth of the food flooded him with reassurance. The dish was simple but packed with flavor, reminding him of homemade comfort meals from his childhood. A second staff member, an older woman with curly gray hair named Martha, likely the cafe's namesake, wandered by the tables, greeting familiar faces. Her warm tone and gentle laughter signaled a maternal presence in the space. "You take your time, sweetheart," she said kindly to Prince William, patting his shoulder. "Nobody rushes around here. If you need anything, just holler." She swept by, collecting dishes from other tables. He realized how her presence seemed to anchor the entire atmosphere, lending a familial, caring vibe. He let himself relax further, taking in each mouthful of the pie, listening to the small talk, absorbing the sense of community that permeated the room. For a moment, he reflected on how drastically different this environment felt from the usual polished halls and formal dinners he frequented. Time slowed in this cozy haven. He found himself lost in thought, wondering how the staff managed to fund their pay-it-forward program. Did they rely on small donations from everyday people? Or were there private sponsors? The impetus behind the concept intrigued him. He mentally noted that if the cafe turned out to be truly altruistic, he'd like to find a way to support it discreetly, ensuring it could serve even more people in need. Yet he also yearned to remain objective, to see if there were any underlying conditions or hidden stipulations. Perhaps at certain times of the day, the cafe's kindness might wane under the pressure of busy periods or more judgmental customers. He decided to linger. He finished his meal, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and sat quietly. Charlotte came around to clear the plate, offering him a friendly smile that was neither condescending nor forced. "How was it?" she asked softly. He replied, "It was wonderful, thank you." She gave a quick nod, her cheeks flushing slightly. "Good, I'm glad." He watched her as she returned behind the counter, exchanging banter with Martha in hushed tones. The closeness of their relationship was evident in how they called each other by affectionate nicknames, how they orchestrated the flow of the cafe. She would call out orders, and Martha would respond with a hearty affirmation. Something about their dynamic resonated with him, like a well-practiced dance, or a mother-daughter pair working in sync for a higher purpose. Late morning drifted into midday. More customers trickled in, among them several who clearly had limited means. He observed how, without a hint of annoyance, Charlotte and Martha would offer them seats, hand them a menu, and direct them to the board of pay-it-forward slips if they hesitated. The staff never announced who was using a prepaid meal and who paid out of pocket. Everything was done with subtlety and respect. One man in ragged clothing sat at a table near Prince William, fiddling with a newspaper while he waited for a coffee. The staff didn't whisper about him. They simply treated him like anyone else. It was a quiet, consistent act of compassion that spoke volumes. After more than 2 hours, the disguised prince felt comfortable enough to wander around the cafe. He moved toward a small reading nook by a tall bookshelf lined with secondhand novels. A worn leather armchair faced the window, and from that vantage point he could watch people strolling on the sidewalk outside. He leafed through a paperback, scanning its pages without fully absorbing the text. His attention drifted to the scene unfolding in the cafe as people came and went. He marveled at how the staff balanced their responsibilities, serving those who could afford it, while also ensuring those who could not felt just as valued. He tried to imagine how it might feel to be truly homeless. The emotional weight of the thought pressed upon him. Although he was only playing a role, albeit for a noble purpose, it allowed him to glimpse how essential a place like this cafe could be. For someone who struggles daily with shelter, hygiene, or security, stumbling upon a sanctuary that offers a warm meal and genuine acceptance could be transformative. He reflected on how easy it was for those in high places to remain detached from the harsh realities faced by society's most vulnerable. This one day had already begun to shift his perspective in ways he hadn't anticipated. Around noon, the cafe bustled with the lunchtime crowd. Office workers, students, and local residents vied for seats. The hum of conversation grew, occasionally punctuated by bouts of laughter, or the scrape of chairs against the floor. Prince William noted how Charlotte and Martha seemed to multiply during this rush, darting from table to table, taking orders, refilling coffee cups, and still managing to chat kindly with patrons. Only once did a moment of tension arise when an impatient customer in a sleek suit complained about slow service. But Charlotte diffused it with a sincere apology and a free cookie, a gesture so disarming that the man ended up tipping generously. Prince William watched the small drama unfold, impressed at how compassion, rather than confrontation, turned a potential conflict into a moment of goodwill. As the lunchtime frenzy slowed, a hush settled over the cafe once more. He was preparing to gather his things and exit when a scene near the door caught his eye. A disheveled older man entered, leaning heavily on a cane. He wore layers upon layers of old coats, and his eyes were bloodshot, possibly from lack of sleep or poor health. A pungent smell accompanied him, and several customers turned their heads away in discomfort. This was a person in dire straits, someone who might test the limits of any cafe's hospitality. Charlotte approached with characteristic warmth, but the man snapped at her, refusing to make eye contact. "I just need to sit," he muttered, his voice raspy. She gestured for him to take a seat at a small table. The man remained standing for a few moments, then eventually slumped down, placing his cane against the chair. Martha arrived with a glass of water. "We'll get you a hot cup of tea," she offered. The man mumbled something incoherent, but there was no mistaking the hostility in his tone. His expression held bitterness and defeat. Despite his rudeness, Charlotte and Martha continued to treat him gently, offering a slice of bread and a bowl of soup from the pay-it-forward menu. Some customers cast wary glances, shifting in their seats, but the staff never wavered in their kindness. Prince William found himself transfixed. If ever there was a moment where their altruism might falter, it would be now, and yet it didn't. He saw that their compassion wasn't contingent on polite behavior. It was unwavering, as if each person who walked through the door deserved dignity, regardless of how they acted. The older man ate quickly, scooping soup into his mouth with trembling hands. Halfway through, he began to sob softly, tears mixing with the broth. No one made a spectacle of his outburst. Instead, Charlotte brought over a box of tissues and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Prince William found his own eyes misting. The depth of empathy he witnessed rivaled anything he had seen in official philanthropic engagements. This was real, raw, and unfiltered humanity, and it stirred something profound in him. He was witnessing not just a random act of kindness, but the embodiment of a principle that could change lives one meal at a time. Hours slipped by, and the disguised prince quietly observed more interactions. When the older man left, Charlotte made sure he knew he was welcome any time. Martha even slipped a sandwich wrapped in foil into his coat pocket for later. The man mumbled an awkward thanks and shuffled out. A hush followed his departure, as if everyone recognized something significant had just occurred. Prince William felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude that such a place existed. He also realized he had come to a decision. The cafe was real in every sense of the word, and he wanted to help sustain it. But how? At mid-afternoon, the crowd thinned again, leaving a handful of customers scattered at various tables. Prince William weighed his options. He could quietly donate a large sum, but that might raise eyebrows if delivered anonymously. He could partner with a charitable organization, but that might expose the cafe to unwanted media attention. Then he considered whether he should simply reveal himself. The thought made him tense. He wasn't prepared for a dramatic unveiling, and he knew that the cafe's staff might react with shock, or even resentment for being tested. But a part of him felt it was necessary to show his gratitude directly. After all, their kindness was unconditional, extended without the faintest hint of expectation or gain. In that sense, they deserved to know that their actions were recognized at the highest levels. He left the cafe briefly and made a discreet phone call. His primary security detail remained stationed nearby, worried sick about him walking about incognito. He instructed one of his most trusted aides to quietly prepare a donation, along with a plan to keep the cafe's anonymity intact in the media. Even if his identity became known to the staff, the press wouldn't automatically swoop in. His next step was more complicated, deciding whether to disclose who he really was or to maintain the illusion. Ultimately, his heart told him that sincerity demanded openness, especially given the cafe's unwavering honesty and compassion. Before re-entering, he glanced at his reflection in the window. The disheveled man staring back looked wholly unlike Prince William of the House of Windsor. Yet beneath the shabby exterior, he felt more connected to his fellow human beings than ever. Steeling himself, he walked back inside. The cafe was nearly empty now, and Charlotte and Martha stood near the counter quietly chatting. He approached them cautiously, his hands trembling slightly. They smiled at him in greeting, no different than before, which only heightened the magnitude of what he was about to reveal. He pulled the hood down, straightened his posture, and removed the cap. For a moment they only looked mildly puzzled. Then their faces flickered with disbelief, recognition dawning in their eyes. He could almost see the wheels turning in Charlotte's mind as she gazed at him. Martha was the first to speak in a hushed voice, her gaze shifting from his face to the floor in stunned awe. "Your Royal Highness?" she uttered, stammering a bit. The sound of those words in the cozy little cafe was surreal. It was as if time slowed, compressing the significance of the moment into a single breath. He nodded gently, his cheeks flushing. "It's me," he replied, his voice reflecting both an apology and a measure of gratitude. "I'm sorry to surprise you like this. I wanted to see how you treat people who need help." It was a clumsy explanation, but it was the truth. They exchanged glances, struggling to find words. Charlotte's face turned red, and Martha pressed her hand to her chest, taking a step back as if she needed to confirm this was actually happening. Their shock gradually gave way to an outpouring of respect and curiosity. He quickly reassured them that they had done nothing wrong and that his visit was not an official inspection. "Your kindness is extraordinary," he began, his words softly resonating in the now empty cafe. "I've been here all day, and I've seen how you treat those who are most vulnerable. You do it without judgment, without looking for anything in return. That's rare, and I wanted to see it firsthand." He paused to let his words sink in. A wave of emotion broke over Charlotte's face. She looked on the verge of tears, but also beaming with pride. Martha gripped her hand, equally moved. Charlotte cleared her throat, searching for a response. "Thank you, sir, your highness. I never imagined." She glanced at Martha, whose eyes were bright with unshed tears. "We just do what we believe is right. We're not always perfect, but we try," Martha added, her voice trembling slightly. Prince William felt a wave of admiration for them both. He wanted to express the depth of what their actions meant, not just to him, but to all the people who had passed through the cafe's doors, yet the right words were elusive. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded paper. The paper bore a note from a charitable fund tied to the royal family. It was an official statement ensuring ongoing support for the cafe's future. "I'd like to ensure you can keep doing this," he said gently, handing them the paper. "And if you'd like, I'll help you expand, maybe set up more cafes like this around the country. But I'll follow your lead. I don't want to disrupt what makes this place special." An emotional hush followed. Martha gingerly took the paper, unfolded it, and gasped at the figure indicated. The donation was substantial enough to cover operational costs for years, plus expansions. Charlotte clapped her hand over her mouth, tears spilling onto her cheeks. It took several moments for them to compose themselves. They expressed gratitude repeatedly, but the disguised prince waved it away with a humble shake of his head. "I'm the one who's grateful," he said, his voice thick with sincerity. "It's easy to forget how far a single act of kindness can go. You've made me see that, so thank you." In the swirl of emotion, Charlotte asked if he would mind taking a photo with them to commemorate this moment. He hesitated. Normally he might decline to keep things discreet, but for this he agreed. He owed them that much, especially since they had welcomed him with no questions asked, showing him the true essence of their mission. They stood behind the cafe counter, snapping a couple of photos on Charlotte's phone. Martha's grin shone brightly, tears still glistening at the corners of her eyes. The difference in the pictures was striking. Prince William still wore his ragged jeans and threadbare coat, but his posture radiated renewed respect for these two women. Charlotte and Martha held on to him as if he were family, forging a bond that transcended social strata. It was a moment that no one else witnessed, but its significance felt monumental. He knew the secret wouldn't last long. Rumors would spread, possibly by the evening news or through social media. Yet he hoped the cafe's essence wouldn't be lost in the ensuing excitement. The real story wasn't about a prince in disguise. It was about a modest cafe that chose kindness day after day without fanfare. As he left, he took one final look around the warm, inviting space. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching motes of dust in the golden beams. The final image etched into his mind was of Charlotte and Martha standing by the register, arms around each other, still marveling at the day's events. Stepping back into the busy London street, he felt the weight of his disguise fall away, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. His security detail fell in behind him at a discreet distance. The day's experience would stay with him for a lifetime, informing not only how he carried out his royal duties, but how he approached individuals from all walks of life. For just a few hours, he had lived outside the protective bubble of royalty, seen the world from a vantage point often ignored or overlooked. He had encountered true benevolence in a small cafe, from strangers who gave with no strings attached. News did eventually leak about the incognito royal who'd tested a local cafe's kindness. Predictably, headlines ran wild, and social media buzzed with speculation and admiration. The cafe found itself inundated with visitors, some seeking a brush with fame, others simply curious or inspired to help. Yet amid the clamor, Charlotte and Martha remained grounded, continuing to run their place as they always had, with open hearts and open arms. They used the new funding to renovate the kitchen, hire additional staff, and extend their Pay It Forward initiative to another location across town. More people found refuge and hot meals, and with it came the blossoming of new communities bonded by compassion. In the weeks and months that followed, Prince William quietly stayed in touch, dropping by from time to time in a more recognizable guise, though never with a full media entourage. He would slip in, share a coffee, and chat with the patrons, thanking them for allowing him to be part of their world, if only briefly. He also worked behind the scenes to highlight the cafe's model to other organizations, hoping it might spark a ripple effect across the country. All the while, he carried the memory of that day in his heart, the taste of shepherd's pie, the comfort of a warm smile when he looked like he had nothing, and most profoundly, the lesson that true kindness needs no audience. It merely needs the will to keep giving, quietly, humbly, and wholeheartedly. Even in the midst of growing responsibilities, he revisited the cafe's humble setting in his mind whenever he felt his resolve wane or the trappings of formality weigh heavily. The memory reminded him that empathy, at its purest, was found in small, unheralded corners of the world. It was discovered in the gentle ways strangers extended their hands to each other, in the quiet moments when no one was keeping score. In the end, his incognito venture had not only tested the cafe, it had tested him as well, challenging him to see how deeply he could connect with people when stripped of his title. The cafe passed with flying colors, and so, in a sense, did he. And while no official label or grand recognition was placed upon that day for those who witnessed it or for anyone who heard the story later, it was an unforgettable testament to the power of simple, unwavering compassion. As time moved forward, the impact of that day extended far beyond the walls of Martha's Heart Cafe. The story of a prince's undercover visit to test kindness sparked a broader conversation about how society treats its most vulnerable. Across the nation, people began to pay closer attention to the small acts of generosity they could offer in their daily lives. The idea of the Pay It Forward board became a symbol, not just of charity but of hope, inspiring similar initiatives in other communities. Cafes, bakeries, and even bookstores began introducing systems where customers could contribute to cover the costs of someone else's need, creating a quiet revolution of collective care. Prince William, while discreet about his involvement, found that his experience influenced his public statements and future endeavors. When addressing audiences, he spoke more openly about the importance of compassion as a unifying force in society. His speeches carried the weight of someone who had seen firsthand the power of kindness in its rawest, most unassuming form. He referred often to the quiet strength of individuals working at the grassroots level, highlighting how their efforts were often overlooked yet profoundly transformative. These weren't just abstract words or lofty ideals. They were rooted in the moments he had shared in that small cafe where people were treated as equals regardless of their circumstances. Behind closed doors, the prince spearheaded efforts to support similar establishments around the country, ensuring they had the funding and infrastructure needed to thrive. He also reached out to corporate partners and philanthropic organizations, encouraging them to invest in grassroots projects that often struggled for visibility. His backing lent credibility to the cause, and gradually, a ripple effect took hold. Yet he made it clear to those he collaborated with that such efforts were not about the royal family or any one person. It was about building networks of support, about communities coming together to lift one another without pretense or fanfare. Meanwhile, Martha's Heart Cafe blossomed into something of a quiet legend. Though it remained a humble establishment at its core, the influx of interest allowed it to expand its reach without losing its soul. Charlotte and Martha continued to lead with humility, even as their story became the focus of media attention. They remained firmly rooted in their mission, often turning down opportunities for excessive publicity to keep the cafe's ethos intact. One particularly memorable initiative that arose from the cafe's newfound prominence was their Kindness Kits program. Using funds from donations, the cafe began assembling small packages containing non-perishable food, hygiene products, and a handwritten note of encouragement. These kits were distributed not only to individuals who visited the cafe, but also to shelters and outreach programs throughout the city. The notes often carried simple but powerful messages like, "You matter," or "Better days are ahead," reflecting the cafe's commitment to fostering hope in even the smallest gestures. For Prince William, the legacy of his disguised visit continued to manifest in deeply personal ways. Over time, he introduced his children to similar outreach efforts, instilling in them an understanding of service that went beyond ceremonial duties. The stories he shared with them often circled back to the day he had walked into Martha's Heart Café in a tattered coat and left with a renewed sense of purpose. He wanted them to know that the measure of a person wasn't in titles or wealth, but in how they treated those who had neither. As he sat with his family years later, watching his children paint pay-it-forward boards for a new cafe opening in a neighboring city, the memory of that transformative day resurfaced once again. It reminded him of the unassuming strength of ordinary people, those who opened their doors, their hearts, and their kitchens to anyone in need, creating ripples of change in ways that were immeasurable yet profoundly real. Even long after the day's media frenzy had faded, the story of a prince disguised as a homeless man lived on as a quiet testament to the enduring power of compassion, serving as a gentle nudge for anyone who heard it to do something kind, no matter how small. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Prince William disguising himself as homeless? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.